Most fires in the wilderness die within hours, and when they do, the cold doesn't give you a second chance. In the winter of 1847, deep in the Rocky Mountains, men were freezing to death in their sleep, not because they were careless, not because they were inexperienced, but because their fires died in the night and the cold moved in before they ever opened their eyes. But there was one kind of man who slept straight through till morning, warm, rested, alive, and his fire was still burning when he woke up. He hadn't touched it once. No crawling out of his bedroll at midnight. No desperate scrambling for wood in the pitch black. No waking up every 2 hours with that cold, creeping dread that tells you the heat is dying and you are running out of time to save it. Just one fire, burning slow and steady through the darkest, coldest hours of the night, still alive at dawn. Mountain men had a trick that most people have never heard of, a way of building a fire that fed itself, that didn't need constant attention, didn't burn out in 2 hours, and didn't demand that you sacrifice your sleep to keep it going. It looks almost too simple when you see it, but it worked every single time, and the men who didn't know it, some of them never saw morning. The mountain that killed without warning. The year was 1847, and the Rocky Mountains had already begun their killing season. Elias Cutter had been trapping the high country since before most men his age had grown their first beard. He knew these ridgelines the way other men knew the streets of their hometown. Every gulch, every windbreak, every creek that froze solid by November and didn't breathe again until April. He had survived 12 winters in these mountains. 12, each one trying harder than the last to put him in the ground. He wasn't a large man, lean and weathered with hands carved from old saddle leather and eyes the color of a sky before a storm. Men who didn't know him sometimes made the mistake of underestimating him. They saw the quiet, they saw the stillness. They didn't see what was underneath. The accumulated knowledge of a man who had learned every lesson from the mountains themselves, paying for each one in cold and hunger and close calls that still visited him in his sleep. But this particular November evening, deep in a narrow valley the Crow called the place where wind sleeps standing up, Elias was in trouble. Real trouble. The kind that doesn't announce itself loudly, the kind that creeps in quietly, wearing the face of exhaustion. He had been moving since before dawn, nearly 16 hours on foot through fresh snowpack that reached his thighs in the drifts. His mule, a cantankerous gray animal named Absalom, had thrown a shoe 2 ridges back and was now moving at half pace, favoring the left foreleg. The beaver sets he had been counting on were frozen solid. 3 days of hard travel for nothing but blisters and a lame mule. And now the light was going. Not fading, going. The way light dies in the high country in late autumn, suddenly and without apology, as if the sun had simply decided it had seen enough and pulled a gray wool blanket across the whole sky. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees in the time it took him to make camp. He knew the signs, the way the air changed texture, the way sound carried too clearly in the deep cold, the way your breath stopped misting and started crystallizing in little silver clouds that the darkness swallowed whole. Somewhere up on the ridge, a wolf called once, long and low, then fell silent. By morning it would be well below freezing, possibly much worse. What fire means when there is nothing else. Here is something that men who have never spent a night alone in genuine wilderness do not fully understand. Fire is not comfort in those conditions. Fire is everything. It is the difference between your body maintaining the narrow band of temperature that keeps your organs functioning and your body beginning the slow, bewildering process of shutting itself down. It is the thing that keeps the predators, the mountain lions, moving like gray smoke through the timber, the wolves that had been following his tracks since mid-afternoon. At a respectful distance, it is the thing that keeps your mind from going to the dark place that cold and isolation and exhaustion will take it, given half a chance. A man with a fire is a man with options. A man without one is simply a man waiting to understand how serious his situation has become. Elias had seen it happen. Men who let their fires die in the night and woke up, if they woke up at all, in a confusion so profound that relighting became almost impossible. Fingers that wouldn't cooperate, flint that seemed to mock them, tinder that had absorbed moisture during the cold hours. He had pulled one man, a Kentucky trapper named Pierce, out of that spiral by sheer luck. Found him at dawn, curled around the gray ghost of a dead fire, barely conscious, mumbling about his mother's kitchen in Ohio. That man lost 2 fingers to frostbite. He had been one of the fortunate ones. The real danger in extreme cold isn't falling asleep, it's waking up to a dead fire. And here was the problem Elias faced now. He was exhausted in a way that went down to the bone. The kind where your body stops asking nicely and starts switching things off one by one. His legs had gone past pain into distant heaviness. His hands were clumsy inside his gloves. His eyes wanted to close with an insistence that was almost argumentative. He could not stay awake to tend a fire. Not all night. Not even close. The wood around his camp was poor, mixed wet and dry, nothing that would burn clean for long. No stand of dead timber nearby, no resin-loaded pine. What he had was a scattering of branches and 2 large logs, remnants of a lightning-struck cottonwood fallen across the mouth of the shallow rock shelter where he intended to sleep. Most men in his position would have done what instinct demanded. Build the fire fast, build it hot, feed it constantly, stay awake as long as possible. But that instinct, Elias knew, was the thing that got men killed. He had learned that the hard way in his 3rd winter, burning through every piece of wood by 2 in the morning and spending the remaining hours until dawn, huddled and shaking, counting the minutes. He had made himself a promise in those dark hours that he would never be in that position again. Old Devereaux had shown him the way out of it, and now in this narrow valley with wolves on the ridge and the temperature still falling, it was time to use what he had been taught. The trick that looks like nothing. He stood in the failing light and looked at those 2 logs for a long moment. Each was perhaps 8 feet long and thick around as his chest. Green heartwood cottonwood, heavy as sin. Moving them was going to cost him energy he wasn't sure he had left. Every exhausted part of him protested. He moved them anyway, because this is where most people make a fatal mistake. They build fires to burn fast and hot. They pile on kindling and small wood and get a roaring fire that throws heat in all directions. And for a brief, glorious moment, it feels like the problem is solved. What they have actually built is something that will consume itself in 2 hours and leave them with nothing but cold ash and a creeping realization that they are in serious trouble. More wood does not mean more heat, not over the course of a night, not when surviving until morning is the actual goal. Mountain men didn't build fires to burn fast, they built them to burn slow. Elias checked Absalom's foreleg, tender but not broken, then turned his full attention to the logs. It took the better part of half an hour, dragging, positioning, adjusting in near darkness, his back complaining with every movement. He placed the first log parallel to the back wall of the rock shelter, about 2 feet out. He placed the second parallel to the first, roughly 18 inches away, both oriented east to west, positioned so the heat rising between them would reflect off the rock wall directly toward where he would sleep. That 18-inch corridor between them, that was where the fire would live. He gathered what dry material he could find: bark shavings, dead grass from beneath the rock overhang where the snow hadn't reached, small sticks that snapped clean and sharp. He built a small, careful fire between the logs. Nothing dramatic, nothing impressive. A modest, deliberate fire, built low, allowed to find its feet slowly. He watched it without touching it. This is why most fires never last. Men pile on fuel too fast, overwhelming the flame before it has established itself, mistaking size for strength. A fire in its first minutes is fragile. It needs air, it needs patience, it needs to become itself before you start asking things of it. Elias fed it with discipline. A small stick, a pause, another stick, letting each piece catch fully before adding the next. The fire was not impressive to look at. A man passing in the darkness might have dismissed it entirely, but it was talking to those logs now, working into the dry outer bark, finding purchase, establishing the slow relationship it would need to last through the hours ahead. Then doubt crept in, quiet and cold as the night itself. What if the cottonwood was too green, too wet from the snowpack? What if he had spent this irreplaceable energy on a fire that simply refused to take hold? He pushed the thought down, adjusted the angle of one log slightly, opening the gap on the windward side to improve the draw. Fed it one more piece of bark, thin as paper, placed with care. Waited. What he did next looked simple, but almost no one does it. He stopped adding fuel. He simply let the fire work. The long watch. For 20 minutes he sat and did nothing but observe. This is the part that runs against every instinct a man has when he is cold, exhausted, and frightened with a long night ahead. Every part of him wanted to pile on more wood, to force the fire bigger, to take aggressive action against the possibility of failure. He let the fire find its own level. The logs began to burn inward, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, but the heat was building in that narrow corridor, concentrated and directed, not dissipating into open air the way a conventional campfire's warmth does. The rock wall behind was warming. The shelter was beginning to hold temperature. As the logs burned along their inner faces, they would slowly collapse toward each other through the night. Incrementally, inevitably, fresh wood continuously presented to the flame, the fire feeding itself on that collapsing wood without any intervention at all. The large mass of the logs controlled the burn rate through the oxygen available in that narrow gap, limited, steady, self-regulating in a way no pile of small sticks could ever be. It was not a machine, but it was something close to a system, a fire that had been designed, not just built. Elias made one final small adjustment, then pulled his bedroll into the deepest part of the shelter, positioned himself so the heat from between the logs would wash directly over him. He did not bargain with himself about waking at midnight to check it. He closed his eyes and the fire burned. Morning. He woke to gray light and the smell of wood smoke. He lay still for a moment, the mountain man's instinct taking inventory before moving. Temperature, sound, the quality of air against his face, warm, dry bedroll, feet with feeling in them, hands that responded when he flexed them inside their gloves. He turned his head. Between the two logs, burned inward now, collapsed perhaps 6 inches toward each other from where he had positioned them. There were coals, a red-orange, deep and steady, pulsing with quiet heat. Not a roaring fire, not even much to look at, but alive, still alive. After a full night, after 8 hours without a single piece of wood added, in temperatures that had dropped somewhere between 15 and 20 below, the fire had simply continued to do what it had been designed to do. The wolves had not come into camp. Absalom stood where he had left him. Everything was exactly as it had been, except that Elias was warm and rested, and had energy that came from genuine sleep rather than the fitful half-rest of a man listening all night for the sound of a dying fire. He built the morning fire from those coals in minutes, fed Absalom, checked the foreleg, improving, ate a cold breakfast of pemmican and dried service berries, already thinking about the day's route. He was moving before the sun had cleared the eastern ridgeline. What most people get wrong. This is what most people get wrong. They build fires for heat in the moment. Big, fast, dramatic fires that satisfy the immediate need for warmth and make them feel like they have solved the problem. These fires feel like the right answer. Every instinct you have says they are, but they cannot sustain themselves through the long hours of a winter night. They burn hot and fast, and they are gone before midnight. And then the cold comes back, not gradually, but all at once, filling the space where the warmth was with swift, absolute authority. Mountain men measured a fire's quality by one thing only, whether it was still alive at dawn. They didn't rely on effort, they relied on design. They understood, through hard experience, through lessons paid for in frozen fingers and sleepless nights, that in the wilderness, sustainable always beats spectacular. Every single time. The slow fire that lasts beats the fast fire that impresses. The system that runs itself beats the one that demands your constant attention and your constantly depleting energy. In the wilderness, the man who is still warm at sunrise is not the strongest man, or the most experienced, or the one with the most wood. He is the man who built the right fire. This is why mountain men survived when others didn't. Not because they were tougher or braver or more willing to suffer, but because they understood that surviving through the night is an engineering problem, not a willpower problem. Solved with 2 logs, 18 inches of space, and the particular patience that the mountains teach to anyone willing to pay attention. They built slow, they slept, and in the morning their fire was still burning. Most men today would build it wrong. Most would be awake at 2 in the morning, cold and frightened, frantically feeding a fire that was never designed to last, burning through their wood and their warmth and their peace of mind all at once. The mountain men knew something different. That knowledge, passed from men like Devereux to men like Elias, forward to every generation willing to listen, was worth more than any amount of extra wood stacked beside a camp. It was the difference between freezing and surviving, between waking up and not waking up at all, every time.